Hi, everyone. Hope everyone is doing well this evening. I am Yves Engler. This is the Canadian Foreign Policy Hour. I think we're almost at 80 sessions now. I'm coming to, which is a Canadian Foreign Policy Hour, is a critical, weekly critical look at developments in Canadian foreign policy. I'm coming to you from Jojage, which has long been a meeting place of various First Nations. Tonight we have a special guest to mark the 50th anniversary of the overthrow of the elected government in Chile. We have an individual who actually was sort of working on the inside at the time and played a role in leaked important cable from the Canadian ambassador that caused a lot of controversy at the time. And I have to be out pretty close to 7 o'clock. So I think I'll get right to developments, and then we'll give a bit of time for our special guest. So first off, Politico, in one of their sendouts, I'm on their daily sendouts, 3 or 4 days ago, they had a title, "The World Still Needs More Canada." They need more. Canada's greenhouse gas emissions among the highest per capita in the world. They need more. Canada's global extractive mining sector causing abuses everywhere. They need more. Canada imperialism in Haiti. They need more. Canada NATO expansion. Sure, the world needs more Canada. But that is, of course, a very common line that you hear that does need to be challenged wherever it comes up. In the Globe and Mail business section, I think it was on Friday, a front page of the business section, big, long article titled "First Quantum's Hard-Fought Panama Mining Contract Faces Protests, Legal Uncertainty." And it basically, I knew First Quantum had big operations in Panama, and that their mine was controversial, and that it was quite a significant economic player in the country. I didn't understand just how the scope of it until reading this article, and of course this would probably be from a fairly pro-business kind of lens. But basically, the story talks about all the special rights that First Quantum had gotten from the Panamanian government, the current Panamanian government, and how much opposition there is on ecological grounds, on nationalistic grounds. Apparently, they're given some sort of like exclusive economic zone that is something akin to what was in existence with the Panama Canal, when the Americans basically, I think it was like a century-long exclusive zone for the Panama Canal, and that led to basically the country not really being sovereign. And so that it's being the agreement that First Quantum had signed with the government is sort of viewed by many Panamanians in that light, according to the Globe and Mail business section. And of course, the Canadian government has backed, they don't talk about it in that story, but the Canadian government has backed First Quantum Canadian diplomats' operations in Panama. And I'm sure if you dig deeply, which I have not on the subject, I'm sure if you dig deeply, you'll find that there's actually been significant Canadian government backing for the mine. Hill Times reported a couple of days ago about the International Development Minister, Ahmed Hussein, going to Zambia. And to their credit, they pointed out that, quote, Canadian headquartered mining firms do big business in Zambia, where copper, a key component in electric vehicles, is king. And that's that's somewhat of an understatement. The Canadian government pushed structural adjustment on Zambia, financed it in the late 80s, 90s, and pushed very hard to have Zambia privatize its state copper mine. And it was Canadian companies that benefited from that. And Canadian aid went to supporting this privatization, lots of pressure by Canadian and other Western officials to pursue it. And First Quantum as well, Barrick to a lesser extent, First Quantum is a major, I think it's the biggest player in Zambia, major operations in the country. So our international development minister, that's part of what an international development minister does, is goes around the world, leveraging Canadian aid on behalf of Canadian corporate interests. And on the African continent specifically, those corporate interests are often mining companies, and they are often involved in very exploitative relations beyond the usual Marxian sense of exploitation relations in terms of dispossession, ecological damage, death and destruction, etc. London Energy, which is actually, it's a Swedish family that's the main owners of London, but a number of the London companies have been based in Toronto, I believe, in Canadian stock exchanges, and actually offices in Canada. The members of the London family in Sweden are actually being brought before a criminal tribunal for complicity in war crimes in Sudan. Now, in 2011, the Harper government gave $4.5 million in aid to the London Foundation for its operations in Africa, and London has been its big player all across the African continent, and the Canadian Aid Agency has supported his foundation, but now it's being accused of war crimes. I think this is the first time this kind of process has ever been held in Sweden. I don't know much about the details, but it's a big, I know it's a very important company in Sweden, but it has very significant Canadian connections. And I think the basics are that it's set up its mining sector in Canada because there's so many advantages to being based in Toronto, primarily Vancouver to a lesser extent, for international mining companies. The Globe had a piece titled "Alberta Hikes Funding to Energy War Room," and it was about how the UCP conservative government in Alberta, how they are spending more money on international promotion of the tar sands. Essentially, I think it's $22 million. It's all like a little bit. The budget stuff is not really being released properly by the government. One of the points of the story. Now, and so they've been spending quite a bit of energy on promoting dirty tar sands in the U.S. primarily, but also in Europe. And the story goes over some of it, and that gets me back to a big section I had in my Harper book. And I don't know how much of this is continued. I presume the Trudeau government has lessened it to a certain extent, but there probably, if you look into it, you probably find there's still some of this going on, which is how aggressive the Canadian diplomatic apparatus in the US and in Europe was in pushing back against any effort to restrict dirty oil, because that would invariably restrict tar sands oil. And it was just like incredible lobbying by like the Canadian consular in Phoenix, and when the state of Arizona looked into something, the Canadian consular in Phoenix was like working in the legislature behind the scenes, trying to get the Republicans to not go on board. I use the Phoenix example. I forget what states they were, but there was like really aggressive lobbying at the state level. Obviously, at the embassy, Alberta has an office at the embassy in Washington, but at the state level, the whole sort of Canadian diplomatic apparatus. And same thing in Europe, even though very little tar sands oil is actually going to Europe, but they were all concerned that this would set a precedent, that these restrictions on dirty oil would set a precedent, which would have a sort of spillover effect on exports of tar sands globally. So I don't know how much of this is still going on. We know the Alberta government is still doing this. I don't know how much the federal government is still involved. We see stories, of course, of the federal government pushing for pipelines into the U.S. and but the more sort of on the ground diplomatic lobbying, and I should say spending public money too on a lot of these pro tar sands campaigns. I think that's what, when Politico talks about the world needing more Canada, that's what they're referring to, is more lobbying for dirty oil, at state legislatures in I don't know, in Wyoming or something like that. The New York Times quoted Kenya's foreign minister a couple of days ago saying, there's a reason why the United States, Canada, the whole of the Caribbean nations, many nations in the world are asking Kenya to take the lead, meaning to oversee a UN occupation in Haiti. So the Kenyan foreign minister is on the record saying the Kenyan government has been lobbying it to take on the mission. We, of course, knew that, but this at least is that confirmation. It really is this a global campaign. It's remarkable. The Dominican ambassador in Canada, talks about how he met with the director of Haiti at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Canada, where they exchanged views on the urgent needs for international assistance to Haiti amidst its complex crisis. Just more examples of just how much diplomatic energy Canada is putting into pushing other countries to take on this UN mission in Haiti, which we have to be very clear, many Haitians are resisting, and at the best, we're talking about maybe overcoming undermining some of the insecurity problem, but propping up a completely illegitimate political structure, which the insecurity issue flows out of the just disintegration of Haitian politics, which propping up Ariel Henry is not exactly dealing with that problem, not to mention the broader problem of lack of sovereignty and of foreign domination of the country. The Conservatives had their convention in Quebec City. They passed a few resolutions, according to Globe and Mail report and Journal de Montréal story. They pushed for an assertive, quote, assertive foreign policy towards authoritarian dictatorships like the Chinese Communist Party. They pushed for a strategic plan for NATO modernization. They pushed a resolution calling for hitting the NATO 2% of GDP. There was a resolution, it's not clear to me if it passed or not, calling on Canada to try to join the AUKUS, the US, UK, Australian alliance targeting China. And so, they pushed more of a sort of aggressive kind of foreign policy, which is not that surprising. This week, I think on Thursday or Wednesday, it was announced that they have the judge who's going to lead the foreign interference inquiry, and they apparently asked a whole swath of people who all turned it down because they didn't want to get attacked like the David Johnson had been attacked previously, but they finally found some fairly obscure, it seems like, Quebec judge to lead this kind of comical exercise. Now, the exercise is it has been expanded before, but beyond just China, which is interesting. So they have agreed. The NDP was successful on that, and they got looking at Russia, Iran, and India, and there was a Globe, in the Globe piece, they quoted some security expert who was complaining about how it got broadened beyond just China, and which is just like too hilarious, considering, let's not forget, it was only about 18 months ago where the whole foreign interference thing was all directed at Russia, right? We had they set up the commissions before the elections and whatever. And now it's like considered like this really like taboo in the security world. It's considered taboo to even raise the Russia thing because that diminishes the China kind of dynamic. Now, the Globe editorial comic today, I'll show it. I don't know if people will be able to see this. I thought this was kind of funny. It's a comic where it's President Xi with a paper saying Canada News, and it says, finally an inquiry into election interference. Can we interfere with that? President Xi is saying. Now, I would say that it's about a 10% chance that this is the comic writer mocking the Globe and Mail and mocking the foreign interference thing. More likely is that it's actually somewhat serious, and and this is just supposed to be a joke about how much Xi is going to now, they interfere, and now they're going to interfere in the inquiry into the interference. It's not exactly clear to me, but nonetheless, this is where we're at with the this question. It's just pretty intense how much is going on there. The Globe had a piece picking up on a previous, I think 2 or so previous pieces. It's titled "Canadian Top Guns Teaching in China, Very Disturbing Allegations," General says. And it's about, I think it's 3 different former Canadian Air Force who are working for some South African company that's been training Chinese pilots. They claim it's Chinese pilots, I think, like sort of in general, not Air Force pilots. And the accusation is it's Air Force pilots. I of course don't really know. But it's intense to see what the sort of like freak out about this. And they're, all about like, RCMP is apparently investigating if they've done something wrong. And then the claim is that if they haven't done something wrong, we have to like strengthen the rules. So former Canadian pilots, they already have some restrictions on what they can say and, who they can help or, whatever. I don't know all the specifics of the restrictions, but they already have restrictions, but those restrictions need to be even tighter. So in the future, a former Canadian Air Force pilot can't possibly train any, Chinese pilot. And maybe why not just go all in and say can't ever go to China, or I don't know, can't ever go to Asia, or maybe, can't ever talk to any Chinese person, or I don't know what the plan is. But that's what they're saying needs to happen. And they have the head of the Canadian military quoted in the Globe piece saying these are very disturbing allegations. These very disturbing allegations serve as a stark reminder to all that we are in an era of great power competition and confrontation, where some are willing to go to great lengths to gain any advantage they can hurt us with. And then he goes on to say this is real. This is a real danger. Now, it's not clear to me like anything's actually happened here. All we're talking about some Canadian Air Force pilots working with a South African company that is training Chinese, possibly pilots, Air Force pilots, which, maybe they can offer some skills, but the idea that this is like some way of China hurting Canada seems like a pretty big step. And that's what the head of the Canadian military is telling the Globe's happening. And he's framing this all as kind of like great power competition, which of course is happening. The question is that who is the driving force of this great power competition? And I would say at the military end, it's unequivocal who's the driving force, which is the US empire and Canada going along with that. And so this, of course, all becomes kind of self-fulfilling. Obviously, the Chinese are going to respond to this kind of aggressive stuff by pushing back. As I should have mentioned, they did with the inquiry. The Chinese embassy in Ottawa put out a statement condemning the foreign interference inquiry as just a way of slandering China. The CBC on, I think it was Friday night, it might have been Thursday night, they had a first clip aboard HMCS Ottawa operating in the Taiwan Strait. And the title was "Chinese Destroyers Confront Canadian Warship in Waters Off Taiwan." The Wall Street Post story actually was much better. I'll see if I have the title. The Washington Post at least admitted that, I don't think I have the actual title, but basically framed it as it was the US and Canada sending naval vessels and China was responding. But the framing in the headline in the CBC clip, but then the individual, David Common, as one Twitter poster stated, why is CBC's David Common riding on HMCS Ottawa warship in the Taiwan Strait with a cavalry of warships thousands of kilometers from Canada, complaining about Chinese provocation. And that's exactly what he was doing, right? He framed it as all this aggressive China, when, as Scott Taylor pointed out, the military watcher, the editor of Esprit du Corps, who was on a previous session, here's a very good YouTube clip breaking this down about just the first of all, the size of the American and Canadian warships versus the Chinese ship. He shows that the image, in fact, you see it's actually a really small Chinese warship, whereas there's a bunch of American, Canadian, Japanese vessels. Obviously, the location of what's going on. The story frames it as China having the biggest navy in the world. Well, that's a joke, right? As Taylor points out, that like any little dinky ship that is technically part of the Chinese Navy could be viewed as equal to a U.S. aircraft carrier, when no one seriously considers, it's not what size of the ship or not having a ship, it's what capacity the ship has, et cetera, et cetera. And everyone knows the U.S. Navy is far, far and away more powerful than the Chinese Navy. But the whole CBC framing is of this China's aggressiveness. And we should be really clear that a CBC journalist does not appear on a Canadian naval vessel in far from Canada's territory, or anywhere even near Canada's territory, without a whole elaborate public relations process from DND, right? So DND controls. I wrote about a bit about this in the propaganda system book, but there's examples where Canadian reporters like don't release information. They're under restrictions while on the ship, and then even when they get off, don't release information because of a whole bunch of different criteria. So this is a very kind of controlled environment, and the military is bringing the CBC on because they want this type of story to justify, sending ships there to hype up the China threat, et cetera. And the CBC, David Coleman just goes completely along for the ride. And in fact, he even kind of like prods the Canadian military spokesperson to be, to hype up the Chinese sort of aggressiveness. The Canadian government condemned Mahmoud Abbas's speech, which did appear. I didn't read it all, but the little bits I saw did appear anti-Semitic. They condemned it, which is sort of all fine and good, except the fact that they never condemn Abbas for his security forces working with the brutal occupation, overseeing Israel's occupation. They often don't condemn Israeli violence against Palestinians. So to condemn some words of Abbas that may have been bigoted is a pretty clear sign of how Canada chooses to get involved in this question of Palestinian rights. On a more positive note, Carleton is launching a journalism award in honor of Palestinian journalist Shireen Abu Akleh. Canadians for Justice and Peace in the Middle East did a poll by ECOS, they commissioned a poll, and found that Canadians, by a pretty big margin, used the most popular choice from, I think it was 3 or 4 different options when describing Israel is apartheid. So like vibrant democracy, there's a few different choices but apartheid was the most popular choice. And when it came to like NDP voters and young people, it was just by like really big margins. So it just shows you how out of step even the NDP, which has moved in a positive direction in the last couple of years, even the NDP is way behind public opinion, and certainly the Liberals and Conservatives. Foreign Minister Melanie Joly put out this tweet on Friday saying, "I spoke with Canada's special envoy on preserving Holocaust remembrance and combating anti-Semitism, Erwin Cotler, today, where I congratulated him on his Israeli Presidential Medal of Honor. Canada is stronger because of your work to advance human rights everywhere. So Erwin Cotler got this Israeli prize, and the Canadian foreign minister is congratulating him. And this whole thing is just adds to the whole farce, right? This is supposedly about like combating anti-Semitism, Holocaust remembrance, but Erwin Cotler is a staunch Jewish supremacist. That's what this is. This is a special envoy to promote Jewish supremacy in Israel. And this whole framing as defensive when it's colonialist, what Erwin Cotler is doing is really kind of remarkable. And him getting this award is just confirmation of that, right? Last week, 10 days ago or so, he was published, co-authoring an op-ed in the National Post saying that the World Court, the International Court of Justice, should not adhere to the General Assembly, overwhelming vote of the General Assembly, calling for its legal opinion on the legality of Israel's occupation. You know, this isn't saying like, condemn Israel. This is just saying a legal opinion. The guy is so far down the path of backing the most fanatic, fascistic, Jewish supremacist government in place in Israel. And he's so far down that path, you can't even have the World Court, follow up with what the General Assembly is calling for, which is a legal opinion. This is where this guy's at. This is the guy they've hired to this position. They've given millions of dollars to. They've given all the status, this special envoy status. It's remarkable, and the foreign minister Jolie, celebrating Cotler getting this presidential award, which is part of the Israeli presidential award, is about something like a brilliant work for Israel, the Jewish people, and all of humanity. I think something like the title of or part of what the description of the award is. But it's clear Israel's right. Israel is right to give Cotler a presidential award. This guy's been his whole adult life. He has been promoting colonialism. He's been an activist, a staunch, who knows how many thousands of hours of his time this guy spent promoting apartheid and colonialism. And he gets this special envoy farcical position from the Trudeau government. Now, Jens Stoltenberg, the head of NATO, basically confirmed that he believes that Russia's invasion was a response to NATO expansion. So in this speech, it came out got a good play on Twitter 3 days ago or so. He said, quote, President Putin declared in the autumn of 2021 and actually sent a draft treaty that they wanted NATO to sign to promise no more NATO enlargement. So it's not clear that I don't know if we knew about this draft treaty before this announcement. He goes on to say, that was what he sent us and was a precondition for not invading Ukraine. Of course, we didn't sign that. He goes on, then he later on says, so he went to war to prevent more NATO, close to his borders. Okay, I thought you were a Putin apologist. Thank you for saying that this war was about NATO expansion. Now we have the head of NATO making it clear that this was about NATO expansion. Pretty remarkable. We'll see. Obviously, the corporate media is not going to give any attention to this, but it's pretty clear what he's saying there. Now, this is the context of the speech was boasting about Sweden and Finland joining NATO, and he didn't want NATO, but he got more NATO is the whole line. But he's making an incredible admission in this speech, and apparently he if you read the longer part, he makes the point in another occasion as well. The Financial Times, a couple op-eds that give you a sort of sense of the craziness of the times. They have one titled, Ukraine cannot win against Russia now, but victory by 2025 is possible. Okay, so now the counteroffensive is not working, but don't worry, by 2025, Ukraine's going to win. And then they had another one on Friday saying negotiations between Russia and Ukraine would be a moral defeat, right? A moral victory is the US sending depleted uranium missions to ensure more current death and long-term death from the health effects of DU ammunitions. Apparently, that's what a moral outcome would be. The scope of NATO involvement in this war, I don't know if I know. I don't know if I just forgot it or didn't just totally missed it. But the Communications Security Establishment, when they put out their report at the end of June, they announced, quietly admitted that they extended its cyber defense umbrella to Ukraine after Russia's invasion. The whole element of how engaged US and Canada are on the intelligence side of this war is a very under-discussed element. We hear a lot about the weapons deliveries, but clearly, and there's a CBS report I just watched just a couple hours ago of this US military room with big screens and showing all the war in live, and just goes into how much intelligence sharing the US is giving with Israel or with Ukraine. So that's a whole side to this, the question of the NATO proxy war that's under. And I should say that in the CBS report, they actually refer to it as a proxy war, which is rare in the corporate media. Now, moving towards the main theme of tonight, 50 years ago, we had a Marxist elected president, Salvador Allende, that was ousted in a violent military coup. We have the Canadian government beforehand cutting off. Well, actually, go back to '64, the election in '64, where Allende almost won. They put up a bunch of aid to Eduardo Frei's government, first aid in South America, because they want to blunt the radical left and Allende's forces. And then after Allende wins in 1970, they cut off export development, they loan credits, they back IMF cutting off money. They try to isolate Allende diplomatically. Canadian banks pull out. They participate in the effort to make Chile's economy scream. And then after the coup, we restart this economic relations. Canadian banks, mining companies get heavily involved, and they recognize Pinochet about 3 weeks after. Now, the left immediately criticized what the coup, and I wasn't alive at this time, but criticized Canada's Trudeau government's Pierre Trudeau government's backing of the coup, and they criticized that immediately. But a development from the inside really gave momentum to the criticism. And our guest tonight, Bob Thompson, and correct me here if I'm wrong in a second, but Bob worked at the Canadian International Development Agency at the time. I think he was a young CIDA official at the time, and he came across, I'm not exactly, you can maybe tell us more about this, Bob, came across a cable from Canada's ambassador to Chile to the External Affairs Department in Ottawa. And in that cable, he says, the Canadian ambassador says, reprisals and searches have created panic atmosphere affecting particularly expatriates, including the riffraff of the Latin American left, to whom Allende gave asylum. the country has been on a prolonged political binge under the elected Allende government, and the junta has assumed the probably thankless task of sobering Chile up. That sobering up process, of course, meant terrorizing tens of thousands, killing thousands, driving many out of the country. And so I thought I would have a Bob on. I know he has an event coming up in Vancouver later on the subject, but to mark the 50th anniversary, well, first of all, to applaud you for releasing the cable and a lot of the heat, and you can maybe describe some of that later that came with this. But first of all, Bob, thanks for coming on. Secondly, how did you leak the cable, and give us a little bit of the kind of background?
Well, I was a junior project officer in what was then the Canadian International Development Agency, what is now the development wing of Global Affairs Canada, in the Latin America division. I had been out of the country. I was actually in France at the time of the coup on a course in France. And I returned to Canada at the end of September, looking through cables and other correspondence in my in-basket, and I came across a series of cables that Andrew Ross, the Canadian ambassador in Santiago, well, he actually wasn't in Santiago, he was in Buenos Aires.
We're losing you, Bob. I'm not sure if you can hear us, Bob, but if you can hear us, it might be good to get rid of your video. Sometimes the connection is better with that. Can you hear us? And or maybe re-enter the Zoom room. Okay, well, I'm not sure what happened to Bob there. Let's just see. Does anyone? Is Bob back? Oh, go ahead, Bob. I think.
Okay, I've just pressed unmute. Am I back on?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Oh, you can hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, yes, well, as I was just explaining, I was a junior project officer with the Canadian International Development Agency. When I saw the Canadian ambassador's cables supporting the military coup and disparaging the people that the military were arresting and killing, I was very, very upset, to say the least. And so I made copies of a number of these cables, and I went out onto the Spark Street Mall and I telephoned a member of parliament and met his assistant on the Hill and handed him the cables, which he eventually read out in the House, and which of course angered Canadian human rights groups, church groups, trade union people, that the Canadian government should be supporting this sort of thing. And Canada, of course, had Canada recognized the coup in Chile after 18 days. And we're recognizing the new government. They did things like increase the aid program to the military government. They did things like provide Export Development Corporation loans of significant amounts to purchase Canadian goods, services. And the Canadian churches and trade unions and human rights groups just got furious. So what I did was a catalyst to push Canadians into action, forcing Canada or pushing Canada to, first of all, develop a refugee policy, because Canada didn't have a refugee policy at that time. We had accepted refugees from right-wing coups and governments in Europe, but we really didn't have a refugee policy per se. Eventually, the pressures got to the point where Pierre Trudeau sent, trying to remember now, a very well-known Canadian diplomat to Chile, who reported back that the people that the Chilean military were holding would make good Canadian citizens and that we should do something about it. And as time went on, eventually, in fact, in the beginning of January of 1974, a Canadian Forces jet was sent to Santiago and brought back somewhere between 100 and 150 Chilean refugees. Eventually, we ended up taking 7,000 refugees, many of whom have contributed in many, many positive ways to the economy and discussions, knowledge of Canadians to what's going on in Latin America. We've had Chilean refugees have become members of parliament. And so what I have always said was what I did was a catalyst to all of these groups. They got quite upset. Canada did eventually form a refugee policy, and we have brought in over the years many refugees from many different countries. I lost my job as a result of that. It took them a while, but they found there were 50 or 60 copies of the cables floating around Ottawa, but what they found was that the member of parliament had circulated a copy of the cable that had the two little tiny black marks up in the corner where it had been stapled, and the black marks on the staples happened to match the copies of the cables that were in the filing cabinet at my desk in CIDA. So they sent out a phony cable with saying, well, let's give the Chileans now X, Y, and Z $million, because there were 3 people who used that filing cabinet. And so the Y $1 million happened to be the copy of the cable that I had received of the three phony cables that they produced. And so they had me in terms of the leaking of the phony cable. So,
sorry, I just want to understand. They then create a phony cable, which they put into you get access to, and then you also try to leak that cable, and then they realize it's you?
Yes.
Wow.
Yes. So that was how they caught me. And so I lost my job at the Canadian International Development Agency. And then 10 years later, I was offered a job, and I actually got a job at Agriculture Canada. And after I'd been on the job for about 10 days, 2 intelligence officers came to my office and escorted me out of the building because I was going to be denied a security clearance to hold that job. So I had already developed an alternative career in many ways. A couple of months after I was let go by the Canadian government, I went to work for the Canadian University Service overseas and had a job with them and changed my career. People who know me know that I probably wouldn't have been very long as a diplomat. I'm not a diplomatic type in many ways because of my activism. So but of course, at the same time, there were a lot of people who didn't want to have anything to do with me because I had done something illegal. And the Canadian government or intelligence services were saying that I was more loyal to left-wing causes than to Her Majesty. And so that
quite a
changed my
compliment.
career. I went off and started doing other things.
But so okay, so did the media? How much media attention did this get at the time? And what are we talking?
Those cables were on the front pages of most newspapers in Canada. Mitchell Sharp, who was the Minister of Foreign Affairs at the time, before they had actually caught me, said that whoever leaked those cables needed to be charged and jailed. And of course, when they finally did name me, my reputation, some circles and whatnot, and the aspersions against me found their way to my family and those sorts of things. So it was a very tense time. I was without a job for a while, and but I've had incidents since then. I was at a meeting quite a few years later in the early 90s at the United Steelworkers offices in Toronto, and we were in a workshop promoting fair trade in cafeterias that were in businesses that were organized by the steelworkers, so that they would buy fair trade coffee from small coffee producing groups in the third world. And at lunchtime, there were steel workers from other workshops that were going on. And I happened to be sitting across the table from a guy who spoke English with a bit of a Latin American accent. And so I asked him where he was from, and he said Chile. So we started chatting in Spanish, and he said, "Oh, when did you come?" He said, "Oh, in 1974. "Oh, really? Well, good for you." And then one of the people at the table who knew me, he said, "Well, some guy leaked cables from the Canadian ambassador in Chile supporting the coup, and the churches got pissed off and brought 7,000 of us to Canada." And I thought, "Oh, that's very interesting." And the woman sitting next to him at the table leaned over and whispered in his ear and said, "That's the guy." And he stood up and he walked around the table and threw his arms around me and thanked me. So that's one of the most emotional moments of my life, and that's happened on a number of occasions as well when I've met Chilean Canadians who came just after the coup.
Well, there's no doubt that you did a great service to, I think to Chileans being persecuted, and I think probably more broadly to the cause of humanity. So a couple of things on this. One part that I do want to make clear, because I think it has quite significant political ramifications. There's a perception, I think, sometimes that because Canada let in quite a large number of Chilean refugees from the coup, that it reflects the fact that Canada opposed the coup. But in fact, what happened was that there was left-wing protest against Canada's support for the coup, and that the Trudeau government at the time, as part of a concession to that left-wing protest, opened the doors to refugees, and to some extent maintained its pro-coup policy, but sort of have a release valve on the pressure by opening the door to refugees. That's my interpretation of the history. So one question I have is that more or less your interpretation? Another thing I wanted to ask, just a bit more technical, is when do you give the cable out, release the cable? Is that sometime in November? It's about like 6 weeks after the coup. But yeah, the first.
It would have been in early October, I believe, because I came back to Canada from France at the end of September. And when I was in France at a course in Bordeaux, there were a couple of Chileans in the same course I was in. And of course, they were watching and listening to what was going on. And the news that we were getting from French press and from Latin American community in France was very, very different from the cables that the ambassador the reports the ambassador was making. It was well known that there were tens of thousands of people being arrested and many, many people being killed. People being killed and tortured, bodies floating down the Mapuche River, that sort of thing.
And so the protest against the coup is part, I presume, is part of what emboldens you or outrages you about these cables. Is it just a question of like the Agence France Presse is reporting stuff in when you're in France, or is it also partly that you're operating in milieus of people who are critical of the coup and critical of or supportive of Allende or whatnot?
Well, I was aware, having lived in Latin America and being fluent in Spanish, I was very much aware of what was going on from alternative news sources, what was happening in Chile, that it was atrocious, that there were bodies, people being tortured, killed, taken out in helicopters and airplanes, and their bodies thrown into the ocean. And I knew of that because I was receiving news through the Latin American community and others, what was happening. In Canada, a large part of the response in Canada came from Canadian church people who were involved in international development projects and solidarity, tending, I suppose, to be liberation theology Christians, but very active in that sense. And they were the people who, together with trade unionists and other human rights activists, who started to put pressure on the Canadian government. And interestingly, those groups now have actually just released a book on that experience. And it's, I mean, I have a copy of it here. It's, Canada-Chile relationships, 1973 to 1990, which documents all of what happened, particularly a large part of that work was coordinated through the Latin America Working Group in Toronto. And they have a big library of their books in existence at York University now. So this book with testimonies of civil society action around Canada-Chile solidarity has just come out to celebrate or to commemorate, I shouldn't say celebrate, should I? To commemorate the 50th anniversary of the coup.
And the Canadian Foreign Policy Institute in about 40 minutes is going to be doing a webinar with a handful of the authors of that book that people can check out. So I'll open it up to questions. I don't have that much time. I should be out partly because of this forthcoming webinar on the launch of this book. I should be out for maybe 7:05 or something like that. But I have made Laura a co-host. And if people have any questions, probably preferably for Bob, but I guess for me as well, go ahead, or comments for that matter.
Well, I have a question, but I don't know if there's something in our webinar, but I can't. Oh, there, I can raise a hand now. Well, there aren't any other questions right now, so I'll ask mine. I'm still not 100% clear on why the Trudeau government was so supportive of this coup. I mean, was it getting back to mining interests, or I mean, what was it? Why were they so supportive of the coup? I don't know.
Well, the Canadian ambassador at the time, Andrew Ross, I never met him, but I guess he was quite right-wing. Allende had nationalized the copper mines in Chile. He was part of a coalition that included the Communist Party, and they were generally with a democratic government, and within their Congress come Parliament, were making major changes and attacks on capital, Canadian capital, mining companies, and others, and we're probably under significant pressure from the US government because the coup itself had been supported and in many ways financially and otherwise by the United States. And so that particular left-wing process that Allende was leading, his coalition was leading, were definitely going against Canadian economic interests, not only in Chile, but anywhere, because it was setting an example for people everywhere, for other countries in Latin America. And so, yes, and as I say, there's a good cartoon somewhere, I think it was in the last post, that showed Canada recognized government X after 3 years, government Y after 1 year, government Z after 2 months, and Chile after 18 days. And so that was certainly part of what was behind Andrew Ross on that. It was, I can't think of exactly what his own background was, but he, as a diplomat, he'd been at the ambassador level for about 10 years by that time, I think, coming up through external affairs.
Okay, Bob, Philip, you go ahead.
Yeah, hi. It seems to me that the only way Canada is ever going to have a sovereign foreign policy is if the American government changes. And the only person that I can see when I observe what's going down in the States would be Cornel West, whose strong position on Israel, the Ukraine war, the xenophobia against China and closing U.S. military bases in Haiti and Latin America and all that. You know, his position and his history has been the same camp that we're in. So my thoughts is there any way that maybe you could get Cornel West on? And is there any way that we in Canada and other people who are peace activists around the world can actually contribute to Cornel's campaign some way? I've contacted him. I wanted to just buy a T-shirt, and I can't do that because that somehow is interfering with you know, the election laws or something. But it seems to me that, you know, Democrats, whoever it is, or Republicans, they're not going to change U.S. foreign policy, which means Canada's foreign policy is going to remain the same. And again, it's, you know, I think Cornel West, from what I've seen and heard and read about him, he's the only one that could actually change it. And it is a long shot because he's got to also fight the Democrats with ballot access in the state. So he has an uphill battle. And if there's, again, like I say, if there's any way those of us who are in the peace movement can help him, that's the only way we're going to be able to achieve our goals too.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you. Let's go ahead, you.
Well, just quick response. I think personally, I would say we're better off spending our time on working on, you know, within Canada. I agree with you that obviously U.S. foreign policy has a lot of impact on Canadian foreign policy. But I know that I think when Dimitri Lascaris was on about a month ago or 6 weeks ago, he mentioned that he's actually somehow involved in supporting Cornel West's campaign. I don't know the specifics of that, but you might want to send him an email. I don't know if there's like a Canadian network in support of Cornel West. I agree with you that his positions are, you know, leaps and bounds better than what we're seeing from you know, Democratic Party. But yeah, so.
Okay, Nadia, go ahead.
Yes, thank you thank you very much for this presentation. I just want to tell the gentleman who made a remark about the American government. I want everybody to understand that all our problems stem from the oligarchs and the billionaires who have hijacked our governments. You have to understand who's pulling the strings. Our governments have become a play in the hands of big business and the billionaires. So why isn't the left targeting the billionaires who are at the cause of all our problems? I don't understand this. We have no more governments. The governments are just toys in the hands of the billionaires, I think.
Well, I think the terminology at a different time might have been challenging capitalism. Why isn't the left challenging capitalism? And I think that maybe the left should be challenging capitalism. And I think that's exactly what Salvador Allende's government was doing. And that's why, and doing it in a way that was through the ballot box, which, you know, maybe unlike Cuba, which was very threatening to the US led order and the corporate dominated order. And that's, of course, why they overthrew Allende, and not just overthrew Allende and stopped his socialistic project, but also, you know, with the repression brought in a very extreme capitalist neoliberal so-called Chicago Boys a project in Chile.
We have a question from Jim Gill. Jim, go ahead. Can you unmute, please?
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead, Tim.
You mentioned that when these communiques were released, that they were all over the media. Do you think that a similar development would take place in the media today? Certainly CBC was a completely different animal in terms of how it covered Chile and so forth on at least on Sunday morning shows. But I can't imagine them getting on side with this kind of story.
Well, it's interesting because in December of, trying to think now, trying to remember, I think it was, I was on the 40th anniversary of the Chilean coup. I was given an award, an integrity award by Canadian journalists for free expression for what I did. And I went to Canadian Journalists for Free Expression annual meeting at the Royal York Hotel in Toronto to receive that. And there were, of course, hundreds of journalists there, and journalists rely on whistleblowers who are willing to take these kinds of risks. And there are quite a few journalists out there who don't just represent corporate and capitalist interests, who look at these things and are starting to blow the whistle on things connected with fossil fuels and what they're doing to the economy and to our daily lives. So while it's true that probably most of the media in Canada, in many ways, certainly the dailies and those sorts of things, are not likely to support large or to denounce the depredations of large corporations, there are lots of people out there looking at these things and seeing what's happening, doing something about it. I mean, the CBC has produced a number of broadcasts on my particular case with respect to Chile, but has done it with respect to many, many other international issues and from that point of view. And there are much larger groups now. I mean, it's interesting that one of the things that I did in my life was I founded the certification system for fair trade coffee, which shows a seal on a bag of coffee that says that coffee came from small farmers organized in cooperatives who were paid a fair price for their work and for their coffee. When we started, our coffee was almost an instant hit across Canada because that coffee was being sold in over 300 Christian congregations out of the back of church on Sundays. And those people put pressures on the supermarkets, who eventually picked it up. And it's now being sold all across the country by supermarkets, as well as informally amongst community groups and of course, many of the people who were involved receiving Chilean refugees at that time and supporting them and getting them coats because they were arriving in winter and finding housing for them and helping them learn English, those sorts of things. Many of those people were progressive Christians and progressive individuals, left-wing groups, left-leaning people across the country who had quite an influence. And those were the people who were pressuring the Canadian government to form a refugee policy so that we could bring in Chilean refugees, because we didn't have a policy that allowed us to do that. And I'm sorry, I can't remember the name of the liberal politician who went down to Chile at the time and looked around and reported back that, yes, this was a terrible situation. These people needed help and Canada should be welcoming them and bringing them back to Canada. So there are networks and people doing those sorts of things all across the country on progressive issues. And that's starting to pick up a lot now too, I think, because of global warming. The wildfires in Canada this summer are making people aware of just what a corporate-led economy can lead to. And they don't quite rightly like it very much.
Thank goodness for them. We have a hard stop at 7:05. We have one question by
Go.
Hans. I don't know, can I?
Yeah, go quickly, Hans.
Go ahead, Hans.
My question and suggestion for a future project is the constitutional referendum that was undertaken under Gabriel Boric's new left-wing government suffered a terrible defeat, almost 2-to-1 rejection. And we should look at that and see what lessons we can draw from that as a follow-up, because that's here and now and not 50 years ago. And I'm afraid that events have not taken as rosy a turn as we would have anticipated.
That's a very good suggestion, because the next version of that constitution and the changes that it will bring are going to be coming up and voted on in Chile at some time. I don't know what the timetable and dates are, but if we are able to support those elements of Chile that are able to push in that direction and consolidate those kinds of reforms, that's a very good project for Canadians to want to be involved in.
Thank you
So,
much, Bob and Nick. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to say thanks a lot, Bob. Thanks everyone for participating. Thanks a lot, Bob, for coming on this evening, and of course, thanks a lot for releasing the cables and having the big impact politically. I think that's a great service to international solidarity that you did. So thanks everyone.
Thank you, Bob.
Oh, thank you.